Hi, I'm Dr. Gordo, and welcome to the Raven and the Writing Desk. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive into the Elements of Style by Strunk and White. If you're not familiar with this book, it is a writing guide with simple, straightforward rules on how to write the English language. If you can master these rules, you will have clear writing. So whether you are writing business emails, you want to make sure that you're being understood, you're a student looking for an A on an essay, or if you're just learning the English language and you want to improve your writing skills, this is the perfect video for you. So let's get started. Rule number 1. Add S to a singular noun to form the possessive singular. Nice, easy rule to start us off. A noun is a person, place, or a thing, and if a person, place, or thing has some sort of ownership over another thing, we call that the possessive. So for example, over here we got Saul, and Saul has a guitar, and so Saul's guitar. We add apostrophe S. That's simple. It doesn't matter if the singular noun already ends in an S, you still put apostrophe S. So we get Charles's crown. And if the word ends in an S sound, we still put apostrophe S, so we have the witch's broom. Pronominal possessives. A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun, and as you can guess it, these particular pronominal possessives have that possessive quality built into them. So we can say her guitar, his crown, its broom. This last one is interesting because this trips up a lot of native English speakers. The possessive is its. It apostrophe s is the contraction it is. So when you go to indicate something that's gender neutral, such as a dog, you're referring to its bowl, and you go to write it, remember it's its bowl, because if you put apostrophe s, you're saying it is bowl. There are some minor exceptions to this rule. As I mentioned earlier, if the singular noun ends in an s, you put apostrophe s. Some will say that you can, if it already ends in an s, that is, you can just put an apostrophe. I think it's best to remain consistent. So for example, instead of saying Jesus apostrophe church, to say Jesus's church, put that S in there. The only time you want to get away from that is if we're referring to something from the ancient world, something from mythology. We tend to say temple of Dionysus instead of Dionysus' temple. Dionysus' temple is not incorrect, but maybe to your ear already, Temple of Dionysus sounds a lot better. And of course, we would never say guitar of Saul. We would say Saul's guitar. And that is rule number 1. Rule number 2, use commas and a single conjunction to list a series. Again, nice, easy rule. Let's just say over here, I've got a mouse, keyboard, and monitor. So I'm going to list that off. Mouse, comma, keyboard, comma, and monitor. A conjunction is a joining word. So likewise, we have coffee, comma, tea, comma, or water. There's our conjunctions there, and this last comma is called a serial comma. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about it. It is also known as the Oxford comma, and it is stylistic. When I was teaching in Italy, and I was going through the elements of style, my Italian students said, oh, no, you cannot have a comma before the conjunction. This is the last comma over here. And again, Oxford comma is stylistic. So in this sentence down here, this is perfectly fine. Mouse, comma, keyboard, and monitor. The thing is, when I see those words together like that, keyboard and monitor, I picture one of those old computers where it's all built into one. To me, putting the comma after keyboard makes it quite clear to the reader that these are two separate items and I have three altogether. What is consistent, though, is the Oxford comma is not used in branding. So, for example, the clothing company RW & Company, the communication giant AT&T, or just a law firm I made up, Smith, Rogers, and Thompson. And that is all to be said about rule number 2. Moving on to rule number 3. Enclose parenthetic expressions between commas. This is when we get into a bit of a trickier rule, because what the heck is a parenthetic expression? A parenthetic expression is a group of words that add detail to an idea, and that's all it is. So, for example, the best way to relax, if one doesn't mind the sun, is to spend a day at the beach. The main idea here is the best way to relax is to spend a day at the beach. This information here in the middle, it's extra. It doesn't interfere with the main idea I'm trying to communicate. It's additional detail. It's a parenthetic expression. Watch out for the words who, whom, which, when, or whose, because they're probably going to set up a non-restrictive relative clause. And as you may have guessed, a non-restrictive relative clause is another example of a parenthetic expression. Quickly, what is a clause? A clause is a group of words that come together to form an idea. We're going to be talking more about them in the next rule, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. Let's just look at this example. The Prime Minister, who was recently elected, addressed Parliament. The main idea is the Prime Minister addressed Parliament. I want to add in this extra detail about that, how he was recently elected. It's not unimportant, it's just in this particular sentence, additional information. When that information within a sentence begins with the word who, that should indicate to myself that it's parenthetic, and I'm going to need a pair of commas. So remember those words, who, whom, which, when, or whose, when you are doing your writing. Now, a restrictive clause is not parenthetical, and as a result, doesn't need commas. For example, those who support the idea must go to the polls. When we look through this sentence, there's no additional information. Every word is contributing towards the same idea. There's nothing extra I can isolate. And as a result, it has no commas. So when you are putting together your sentence, determine what information is essential, what information is considered extra. When you realize the difference between two sets of information, you'll know how to put them into the proper order of your sentence. Going along, I'm going to give some advanced tips as well, because they're from the Elements of Style. If you are a beginner, this might seem a little much, but it's good to listen to. And if you are really working on your writing skills, please pay attention. Because the better you know the rules, the better you know when they bend. For example, the beach is a great way to relax if one doesn't mind the sun. So see what I've done here? It's still the center idea about relaxing at the beach and this additional information about the sun, but I've reworded it so that it flows together much better. It's also good to know that parenthetic expressions, when they do appear, need to be set aside by a set of commas. So looking through this sentence here, you might think, you know what, I like to place a comma around here somewhere because that's what would sound good to you. But in the meantime, let's just agree that this sentence flows well, and any comma in there would actually interrupt it. Now, the thing about the pair of commas, in this example here, my student, John, gave an excellent presentation. You can't do that. In this sentence, the name of the student, John, is parenthetical. So I need to put commas on either side of it. Now, of course, I can rearrange this sentence to say, John, comma, my student, comma, gave an excellent presentation. Either way works. Just remember that you need to set off the parenthetical expression with a pair of commas. Other parenthetic details that are important to know and how they relate to commas is dates. January to June, comma, 2020. February 10, comma, 1977. Friday, comma, March 1, comma, 2024. Now, if you're like me, you grew up in Canada, dates can be a little bit confusing because the British do it one way and the Americans do it the other. So when you're doing your numbers, does it go day, month, or month, day? This one right here solves that issue for you. Going with a number, the name of the month, and the year, very clear. Just to start to wrap up this rule, abbreviations are also considered parenthetic and need a comma. So if you're dropping an etc., i.e., or eg in your sentence, it's going to be followed by a comma. And of course, if someone's title is a PhD, John Smith, PhD, you're going to have that comma right there. Or if they have their title, Jane Rogers, comma, attorney. This can be a little confusing because if the person's profession is so intertwined with their personality, you can get away without using a comma. So for example, Billy the Kid, the writer Hemingway, William the Conqueror, the singer Molly Cyrus. This is something that, if this is totally new to you, you'll get used to it as you learn more about the English language. And just know, if the profession and the actual person are so entwined, put it together. Otherwise, put the title separate from the person with a comma. Because rule number 3 was our first tricky rule, let's just give it a quick summary. An example of a restrictive clause, and therefore has no parenthetic expression. People at the back of the crowd could not see. An example of a non-restrictive clause, which is also an example of a parenthetical expression. My cousin, who is legally blind, moved closer to get a better look. So who is legally blind gets set aside by commas. It's not that the fact that he's legally blind is unimportant. It's the way the information's being presented. If I wanted to rewrite all of this, I could say, my cousin is legally blind, period. He had to move closer to get a better look. Either way you'd like to do this is going to work. As you develop your own voice, your own writing style, you'll be able to choose which correct version works best for you. In the meantime, on to the next rule. Rule number 4, place a comma before a conjunction introducing an independent clause. You'll remember from rule number 2, I'll put another 2 here, that a conjunction is a joining word. We also talked about clauses in passing in rule number 3. I said that a clause is an idea, and that I think it's a good definition. A group of words come together to form a clause. If those words form an idea that can stand on its own, it's independent, it's an independent clause. Let's take a look at this example. YouTube is a successful platform, but it does not have any true competition. I've numbered things here to break it down. Number 1, that is my setup. And the way I phrased it here, that's an independent clause. YouTube is a successful platform. That's an independent clause. But I'm setting up more information. I'm setting up my main point. So, number 2, I put in my comma. Number 3, there's my conjunction, the word but, and that sets up my independent clause. It does not have any true competition. Of course, we could do some other things with this sentence, such as throw in a semicolon, divide the clauses that way. I could put in a period and start a whole new sentence here. 2 simpler sentences. Big fan of simpler sentences. In passing, I should give you a definition for a dependent clause or a subordinate clause. And as you could probably guess, a dependent clause is a partial idea. Its meaning depends on another clause. So for example, YouTube needs is a dependent clause. Okay, what is it that YouTube needs? Competition is. There's also a dependent clause. I've got my subject and I've got a verb, also known as the predicate. So if I put these 2 dependent clauses together, competition is what YouTube needs. In this case here, the word what serves as a subordinating conjunction. And unless you're an English teacher, you don't have to worry about those terms. I'm just pointing out all the technical stuff going on here. The point is the 2 dependent clauses come together to form an independent clause. I could also reword things to say what YouTube needs is competition. But enough about this, you know what a dependent clause is. I will give you this that is a bit more advanced. If two clauses share a subject with and as the conjunction, a comma is not required. For example, I have trained for years and I'm ready for the challenge. You could say, shouldn't you have a comma after years? I have trained for years and I'm ready for the challenge. You could, and few would point it out to you. I am just saying that if you have the option not to use the comma, I say go for it, because when all of your sentences get put together and you've got all these different sentence strategies working together to have a nice flow of ideas, you're going to be using a lot of commas. So if you can get away with not using a comma, it's going to contribute to the overall rhythm, and you'll probably be happy with the results. Just a quick recap of what we've talked about so far. So in rule number 1, we're adding s to a singular noun to form the possessive. Easy. In rule number 2, we're listing items in a series using commas and a conjunction. Easy. Number 3, a little trickier. Parenthetic expressions are word groups isolated by 2 commas that provide additional details. For example, a restrictive clause. Then in rule number 4, we've been looking at independent clauses, ideas that can stand on their own. When we want to have an independent clause within a more complex sentence, set it up, comma, conjunction, independent clause. Now that we're confident that we can spot an independent clause, let's talk about rule number 5. Do not join independent clauses with a comma, because if you do, you will create the dreaded comma splice. Perhaps you've had English teachers over the years talk about your comma splices and you just don't know what it is. It simply means you've put a comma in the wrong spot. Most like you have put a comma where a period or a semicolon should go. For example, I'm flying to BC and taking the train to Toronto. After that, I'm driving out east. What I have done right here is a comma splice. So simply change that to a semicolon and the problem is fixed. Of course, I could also put a period and put in after that, make that a capital, comma, I'm driving out east. Create 2 simple sentences out of it. But the key here is we want to recognize what a comma splice is and avoid it. So let's not put commas in the wrong spot. If you're saying, but I'm new to writing out English, how do I know where a comma goes? Practice is the best advice I can give you. Also, being able to recognize the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause will tell you where periods and commas need to go. But the best advice I can give, once again, practice, practice, practice. And while you're practicing, you can look at one of these more advanced points. This is really important to you essay writers out there, because the following structure I'm about to give you is an excellent way to set up a concluding sentence when you really want to hammer the point home. And that is, if the second clause is connected to the first clause, not with a conjunction, but with an adverb, a word that modifies a verb, that adverb also needs a comma after it. That sounds complicated, but I think when you look at the example, it's much more straightforward. This accident could have been avoided, semicolon. Therefore, comma, we must follow the safety rules. In this case here, therefore is the adverb. So if you're essay writers out there, note the following words. Therefore, accordingly, besides, then, and thus. And I'm hoping you can already picture in your mind how you can set up a point. You're saying such and such, semicolon, accordingly, following point. Very smooth construction, works very well. Another advanced point, and this would be an exception to the rule. Short and similar clauses may be joined by a comma. So just in the face of this rule, these small independent clauses are saying, no, I think we're going to take a comma. And you'll learn them in practice. I provide, you consume. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That is a really well-known English expression. And again, because of the comma here, it's actually violating rule number 5, but elements of style. This is all part of the magic of the English language. Now, interesting point, if we cross-reference rule number 2 and we talk about using commas in a series, we can actually use rule number 2 to violate rule number 5 a little bit. As long as we have balanced sentences, we can actually list off independent clauses. For example, the lights dimmed, the stage rose, the band emerged. The reason why this structure works is because I'm going article, noun, verb. Article, noun, verb. Listed off one another will actually allow me to put in commas to put together 3 independent clauses into one sentence, nice and smooth. But balanced sentences are something everyone needs to work on. If you are working on, even in a simple email, balanced sentences can make it sound a lot better. And if you're writing essays out there, you need to master the balanced sentence. Now, rule number 5 can force a lot of new writers to break rule number 6. Do not break sentences in two. This is when we use a period instead of a comma. So new writers out there wanting to avoid comma splices accidentally put a period where a comma can be and make an equally as bad error. For example, I discovered the channel last year, period. Randomly searching for cooking videos. As you can probably tell with your ear, something's not quite here. Something is off here. Let's change that to a comma and put in the word while. I discovered the channel last year while randomly searching for cooking videos. In this next example, when he talks about Bitcoin, he talks fast. Let's change that comma period to a comma, and the problem is fixed. So just like in rule number 5, where we're replacing the commas with semicolons to fix them, to fix a sentence fragment, more often than not, we're changing the period to a comma. A little bit more of an advanced point, and this is something I've been talking a lot about in this video, is to favor simple sentences. We don't want our sentences so simple that they become sentence fragments, but with the elements of style, as you get more confident in your writing, you may find a well-placed sentence fragment actually helps the piece. For example, I stumbled through the woods frantically waving my phone. No signal. In this case here, no signal, you could say, well, that's a sentence fragment. I'm saying it's actually a dependent clause that relies so heavily on the previous information, it actually flows all well together. This is also going to help you in dialogue if you're writing dialogue, because in real life people do sometimes talk in sentence fragments or choppy sentences. So when you're writing dialogue, don't be afraid to write it as you're hearing it, but avoid accents. We'll discuss doing dialogue in a different video. All we need to say for now is do not break sentences in two. Do not use a period where a comma should go. Rule number 7, use a colon after an independent clause to introduce a list of particulars, an appositive, an amplification, or an illustrative quotation. All of these have the same idea in common. A colon is a signpost for clarifying or defining details. It is saying to the reader what follows needs your attention. For example, a quality video requires 3 components: a good camera, a good microphone, and a good idea. So a quality video requires 3 components. I put the colon here to indicate I'm about to tell you what these 3 components are. And also note that the repetition of the word good helps balance out these clauses to make it even more smooth. So I'm just going article, good, the adjective, and then the noun, camera. A good microphone and a good idea. Now, we've been talking about commas and periods so far, and the semicolon. Now we're getting into the colon. It is important to understand the difference in these stage cues, as I've described them before. A colon has more emphasis than a comma. I'm trying to illustrate it here when I say listen. Can you hear it? As opposed to listen. Can you hear it? By putting the colon here, I am placing greater emphasis on what follows. So, as the writer, you're doing the stage cues. What do you want the reader to know about the information that follows? Also, the semicolon has greater separation powers than the colon. What does that mean? As we've already seen in this rule, the colon is setting up important information. It's an important part of the sentence, whereas a semicolon is going to divide clauses. It makes a clearer separation between the ideas. And if any of you out there are kind of chuckling, how could I be taking punctuation so seriously? Again, punctuation determines the flow of the writing. You may have seen this example right here. Let's eat grandma, or let's eat grandma. So what exactly are you trying to say? Because that one comma changes everything. To better understand how to use the colon, it's important to cross-reference rules 3, 4, 5, and 6 and see how this all comes together. In Rule 3, we talked about parenthetical information. So when is additional information considered parenthetic? Well, it's when you, as the writer, determine that it's parenthetic and you decide to set it off by a pair of commas. However, you may feel that there is information that is vital to the understanding of the idea as presented, and so this is where the colon can come into play. Let's take a look at this example and see why the colon is the best choice of punctuation for this sentence, or this example. The reason why writers need to know the colon is clear. Punctuation is vital to good writing. We could put in a period and have two sentences. That would work, but the reason why writers need to know the colon is clear. Punctuation is vital to good writing. Because those two thoughts really need one another to form meaning, the semicolon would be arguably better than the period. Join them more into one sentence. But again, that semicolon still has enough separation power that it's dividing these ideas when they should be working together. And so that is why I'm going to change that semicolon to a colon. Make that look a little bit better. The reason why writers need to know the colon is clear. Punctuation is vital to good writing. I am going to use this as part of varying my sentence strategies. For those who play competitive sports, you may know that if you run the same play over and over, it's probably not going to be a successful strategy for you because you're going to be predictable and any talented opponent is going to see right through you. Same with your writing. Your plays are your sentence structures. Vary your sentence structure. Find the most interesting way to present the information to the reader, and don't just repeat the same sentence structure over and over. Now, a colon cannot just go anywhere. This is coming out of the Elements of Style, so I'm going to share it as well. And these are fairly obvious errors, but if you are brand new to the language, this is good to know. We can't put the colon in between a verb and its complement, such as pass me. We can't be putting a colon in there. And I'm not sure why this person would think that the emphasis would be a good place there, but I wanted to exaggerate this to make it clear. And we also can't separate a preposition from its object. It is on top of the fridge. Yeah, that doesn't sound right. Let's just get rid of that colon. Getting a little bit more advanced, a colon can join two independent clauses if the second augments the first. Social media has only begun to impact politics. With the rise of AI, we must be extremely careful about what we post online. Once again, here's an example. We could easily make that two separate sentences, but because the ideas in both clauses can come together to form a much stronger idea, why don't we drop in a colon and combine them that way? Colons can be used to set up clear, direct quotations. So I want to talk directly to the essay writers or anybody who is quoting somebody in their writing, because I see things like this all the time. Shakespeare writes, period, and then in quotation marks, to be or not to be. I've done the same thing in this example right here. And you might be thinking, the second one's better because he's got the date in there for the citation. But this example is making the same mistake as the first because it is doing what I call a free-floating quotation. When you are quoting somebody, you are letting somebody else do the talking. And so when you just drop in a sentence with quotation marks on either side, you've given over an entire sentence of your paper for someone else to speak, when this should all be your words. So, first of all, you should be limiting your direct quotations to, you really need to hear what this other person had to say. I can't put this into my own words, so I'm going to share it with you directly. You're doing that rarely. And then when you are putting it in there, you are going in and saying Shakespeare, Shakespeare writes, to be or not to be. That way you're including the quotation in the sentence. Another way to do it is to put in a colon. I can put that over here as well. So in both these examples, I have fixed the error. I have gotten rid of that free-floating quotation by simply replacing the period with a colon. And now I'm making it very clear to the reader that someone else is going to be doing the speaking in the following quotation. Just to start to wrap up this rule, we're also going to see colons in salutations. It's rather formal to say, "Dear Mr. Smith, colon," as opposed to a comma. But if it's a formal letter, you might want to go that other way. You're also going to notice colons in the time. We also see it in titles to set up a subtitle. We see it in Bible verses. And you may have noticed all throughout my notes in this presentation, I use colons all the time to set up my examples. So the colon can be quite versatile. And if you haven't already started to use it, start to use it. Moving on to rule number 8. Use a dash to set up an abrupt break or interruption and to announce a long appositive or summary. And I did mention the last one on positive, two nouns or noun phrase to classify a noun, such as my dog Thor would be an example of an appositive. But getting back to the actual rule here, the dash may be my favorite piece of punctuation. It's stronger than a comma. Think of it as a sledgehammer compared to a hammer. And it's also less formal than a colon. And it's more relaxed than parentheses. I'm going to be explaining all of this. But first of all, let's take a look of the dash in practice. His honesty, dash, something that is lacking in this business, dash, is appreciated. So notice I didn't use commas and made this part parenthetical. It's something that is not parenthetical. It is something that it is important enough to share with the reader, but as we've seen in this example, when you've got essential information and additional information, how do you manage it? How do you best organize it? And we've learned that, well, varying our sentence structure is a great way to go about it. We always make sure that we're being nice to listen to. But what the dash is doing here is something different. It's taking a thought and it's letting it stand out in a different way, only a way that the dash can provide. The more you use it, the more it'll become obvious the way this works. What is meant by the dash being less formal than the colon? Well, the colon sets up the sentence to finish a thought. You saw that in the last example. If you need a refresher, just go back to Rule 7. The dash also sets up a thought, sets up to finish the thought, but it's with more emphasis. So for example, he took a bite, dash, spice bursting like fireworks. So you can have a bit more of a flair with the dash, and that's why they say that it's less formal. It's not that you can't use it in formal writing such as essays, it's just that you save it for your more dramatic information, or you want to put a special kind of emphasis on the information. Once again, it's not like you're dropping a dash in every paragraph. The dash is something I save maybe just a couple times in a even short essay, and I want to save it for that information that I really want to stand out in a different way. And it's going to stand in a different way because it's the only one that's using the dash. Moving along, dashes can also be used to set up a direct quotation, or rather, so the author of a direct quotation. To be or not to be, dash, William Shakespeare. I do want to mention how you can use the dash in dialogue. So if you're creating stories, you have characters talking, you may have one character say, what I need to say is, wait, did you hear that? By putting in this dash here, it's indicating to the reader that this speaker is being interrupted. And I think that follows quite clearly. You can also use the dash in prose if you want to make an abrupt change. I was in the garden. No, I was in the garage. Sets up a bit of a I'm thinking here in this example. Now, this rule mentions parentheses, but the book, strangely, doesn't really talk about what parentheses are and when you do use them, so I thought I'd put in my own bonus rule. First of all, limit use of parentheses. And I'm sorry, if you don't know what parentheses are, they are the nice curved lines that we see in writing. They're not brackets. Those are brackets. Parentheses have a nice curve to them. You are mainly going to use parentheses in your essay writing for citations. I gave you an example of in-text citation a couple slides ago, and that is you're going along in your writing and you want to put in the quotation, and so you're putting the parentheses around the citation, and probably putting a period after that. In your actual writing, a parenthesis it's an opportunity to add in a side thought or an afterthought. So for example, I tried calling, my fourth attempt, but she didn't answer. The thing is, in formal writing, why do you want to have side thoughts? Why do you want to have afterthoughts? If it's important enough to say it. I rarely put information in parentheses. I actually can't remember the last time I was actually doing a paper and I used parentheses other than a citation. I think I've used it in the presentation here, but like I said, I use it rarely. Rule number 9. The number of the subject determines the number of the verb. This is the most pernicious rule because it seems so straightforward, but it trips people up the most. Native English speakers make these mistakes all the time. So I have my notes here. I'm going to go through this one slowly, make sure I get it right. First of all, quite easy to start off. This is my chair. There are more chairs over there. Quite simple. We have a verb, subject, agreement. We have a chair and we have chairs. Hence we have is and we have are. Now, again, still fairly easy. I think it's quite evident in this sentence, despite all the additional information, that I'm still just talking about one thing, that one thing being hockey. Hockey, with its white surface, black puck, and colorful uniforms is an intoxicating sport. Sometimes when people get listing things off, their ear wants to say are. They want to make that plural. Likewise, the confusion that day, its noise, its chaos, its intensity is in my nightmares. So it should be evident from using its singular to be an indicator that you're going to use is. But again, don't let rhyming off some details confuse you. Now, this is where it can get really tricky. Listen to this sentence. One of the talented players who have shaped the game. A lot of you are thinking, okay, I wrote it down incorrectly and now I'm about to make the correction. This is correct. This even fooled Google Docs when I was doing my script for this. One of the talented players who have shaped the game. I'm not just talking about one person. I'm talking about one person in a group of others. If I wanted to make it singular, I would say he is a player who has shaped the game and make it very clear from the onset that it's singular. This part, as far as this rule goes, is one of the more straightforward parts. A verb must be singular after the following words: each, either, everyone, everybody, neither, nobody, someone. For example, it is either or, nobody is home, and to each his own. I want to highlight this one because automatically some people might think, well, isn't that sexist to say his own? What if it's a woman? Well, this is actually an expression. Over all the years, to each her own never took off because it doesn't really sound right to the ear. And that's because, in this case, his refers to anybody. It is an expression. And if you think, well, why can't we just say to each their own? Because is not their not considered a gender neutral singular term now? Okay, fair enough, but we get back to each. And so to make this correct would violate this part of the rule. So the expression is to each his own. If you don't like that expression, you're the writer, come up with a different one to express the same thought. Moving on, same idea, someone is looking at us. Now listen carefully to this one. If a compound subject, i.e. two or more nouns, is joined by the word and, the verb is almost always plural. For example, the phone and the laptop are on the desk. Notice it's a little bit different than the hockey example I gave earlier. Exceptions are expressions. The long and short of it is, or she has bread and butter. I'm going to quote directly from the Elements of Style on this one to make sure that I get all the detail in there. A singular subject remains singular even if other nouns are connected to it by with, as well as, in addition to, except, together with, and no less than. So these are all words you should make some notes on because they come up often in writing. And so some examples on how you're going to use this. His opinion as well as his outfit is offensive. I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, I really want to say are over here. But again, it's because it's joined by as well as, and it's just one person. It's his opinion that is the focus. Now, if that's difficult to follow, it's easier to hear in the second example. The necklace with pink diamonds is gorgeous. Well, the necklace is gorgeous. Okay, so if the necklet has more jewels, it's still one necklace, so it remains singular. Linking verbs agree with the number of the subject. So a linking verb, instead of action, it expresses a state of being. So I am gored. Like I'm always going to be gored. And so in this case, the verb am refers to my state of being. Examples. The trouble with truth is its many varieties. So I'm saying that truth comes in more than one form, but the subject here is singular, so it's going to be is. But on the other hand, what are our needs? Of all of our wants, water is the most pressing need. Be aware of singular nouns that sound plural. For example, politics is an art, not a science. So even though it ends in S, it's still singular. However, where is the headquarters located? Headquarters, you think, okay, there's more than one, but no, there's only one place that is known as headquarters. So we're going to go with is. However, the main offices are on the top floor because you're referring to all the different individual offices on that floor. So you need to think, is the subject a single entity, a non-count noun, or a group? There is jam in the jar, but there are marbles in the jar. What's the difference? I can try to count the marbles, but I can't count the jam. And because I can't count it, a non-count noun becomes singular. Rule 10, use the proper case of pronoun. So way back in Rule 1, I mentioned pronouns are words that replace nouns. And pronouns can be a subject like he, an object like him. Let me highlight that for you. He, him, or a possessive like his. For example, he gave it to her. She reads to them. They write to whoever. Whom should I ask? It's easy enough so far. But it does get a little bit more advanced, and this gets into the dreaded, is it I or me? A lot of English speakers will get this incorrect, so let's go through this slowly. Subjective pronouns, words like I, he, she, are also called normatives. It's not that important you remember that word unless you're an English teacher. Now I'm going to quote from Elements of Style on page 12. A pronoun in a comparison is nominative if it is the subject of a stated or understood verb. So what the heck does that mean? It's best to see it in practice. Sandy writes better than I. Then I write. And if you're wondering, is it me? Okay, try this out. Sandy writes better than me do. It's like, oh, as soon as you have do in there, it just sounds wrong. But once you take away do, Sandy writes better than me? Oh, that sounds pretty good, but it is incorrect. Why is it incorrect? Because it's a comparison. I'm comparing my writing to Sandy's writing, and I have to say, Sandy's better. Sandy is better than I. In many of my videos, I talk about the importance of tight writing to express ideas in as few words as possible because it's just more economic that way. However, I also emphasize the need to write balanced sentences. So what you need to do is get the sentence balance, then think about if there's any words that can be eliminated. So in this example here, it is better to say Sandy writes better than I write. It's just more balanced that way. Likewise down here, she supports it more than I support it. I support having that little bit there at the end of the sentence. Moving on to the next point, I just talked about subjects, but the what is receiving the action from the subject, I know that sounds really confusing, is the object. The sentence has a subject and the object. The sentence is doing the action, the object is receiving the action. And so that makes it an objective case. And we're going to use words like him, her, us, and me. For example, a group of us are going. She gave it to me. They visited the Cohens and us. I want to show this to you. So in this last example, I, subject, I'm the one doing the action. And what's that action? Showing you something. And then perhaps if that person has something to show me, if I'm receiving the action, I use me. But if I'm comparing anything I have to another person, I'm going to use I, because subjective case versus objective case. Now, if you need another hint, when you see the word to in a sentence, it might be referring to the infinitive of a verb, but quite often it's indicating something receiving action. And so the words that are coming after to are more likely to be an objective case. Moving on to the possessive case. The possessive case shows ownership, and this comes in one of two ways in this particular rule. The word your and the word yours. Again, English terms, one is an adjectival modifier and the other one is a noun form. For example, your phone is over there. That phone of yours is over there. It all depends on how you want to present the action. Are you talking to the person directly, or you're making a reference to an object over there? Moving on, gerunds. Gerunds take on the possessive case. What's a gerund? This is when a noun you add in ing. English loves adding ing onto words. They add the ing onto the noun to express a person, place, or thing doing the action. For example, skiing. You add ing to ski. For example, the referee is annoyed with our loud cheering. My skiing is improving. Over here, there's your gerund. Finally, the present participle takes on the objective case. A present participle is when we add ing onto a verb to express a continuing action. For example, we saw them playing yesterday. And that wraps up rule number 10. I know it was a little intense at parts there, but if you go through it a few more times and you practice with it, the more it's going to make sense. So in the meantime, let's move on to the next rule. Rule number 11, a participial phrase at the beginning of a sentence must refer to the grammatical subject. And I must apologize, I am having trouble with participial phrase. It's that IAL at the end that always gets me. It's a fancy English term. It just refers to a group of words indicating a state of being in the past or present. You're going to notice that words that end in ing, ed are going to hint you off. Grammatical subject, the subject of the sentence, no different than we've been talking about elsewhere in the video. So what does this mean? A participial phrase at the beginning of a sentence must refer to the grammatical subject. This is just a warning that when we get into a rhythm in our writing, we tend to get into a pattern where we'll set up the sentence, comma, and then our main point. Inadvertently, not all the words at the beginning of the sentence may agree with the subject as expressed later in the sentence. For example, reading the article, he saw a woman wearing a red dress, as opposed to he saw a woman wearing a red dress reading the article. Who is reading the article? In the first example, it is a he. And in the next one, in the second example, it's the woman, who also happens to be wearing a red dress, is the one reading the article. If you're not careful, this rule points out that some results could be really funny. It's also known as a dangling participle, and you don't want your participles dangling. Let's go on with this. Participial phrases preceded by a conjunction or by a preposition, nouns and apposition, adjectives, and the adjective phrases come under the same rule if they begin the sentence. I'm quoting directly from Elements of Style, and the authors are just elaborating on the rule. It doesn't really change anything. Once again, it's best to look at the actual examples to see what we're talking about. Upon arriving in Toronto, the press asked him some questions. For a lot of new writers, that sounds like a perfectly fine sentence. They're imagining someone's arriving in Toronto, the press is there, and they're asking questions. The trouble is, we know what we're trying to say, and that doesn't always get down on the page. Look at the second example. Upon arriving in Toronto, he was asked questions by the press. Can you see how that sounds better than the first example? And it's not just because it sounds better, it's because I want to make sure that phrase at the beginning of the sentence is agreeing with the subject. Here's another example, and this is quite awkward. A player of unquestioned heart, they retired his number to the rafters. I hope you can hear the awkwardness in that sentence. So let's try rephrasing it a bit. A player of unquestioned heart, his number was retired to the rafters. And I'm hoping that sounds better. And I'll now point out why it should sound better. Take a look at the second half of the sentence in both those examples. He was asked questions by the press. That can stand on its own, can it? As opposed to the press asked him questions. It sounds a bit choppy, right? Same beginning of the sentence. It's just a matter of the phrase we're using at the beginning of the sentence needs to agree with the grammatical subject. And now take a look at the second example. A player of unquestioned heart, his number was retired to the rafters. His number was retired to the rafters sets up a nice independent clause, as opposed to they retired his number to the rafters. It's a bit awkward, and I'm still not really liking the second example, but it does sound better. And now let's read this last example carefully. Overeager and stubborn, the job looked easy to me. As opposed to overeager and stubborn, I thought the job easy. I'm thinking, why is this one with the check mark and that one has the X? Why is this one better? Because I thought the job easy, overeager and stubborn, they really do need one another to form meaning. It's not like this part here is a strong, independent idea. It just comes down to, is this part of the sentence agreeing with the other? What does being over eager and stubborn have to do with the job looking easy? As opposed to, I thought the job was easy, but I realized later I was being over eager and stubborn. Tricky, I know. Although when you look at some more extreme examples, things can get rather amusing. Being in rough shape, I bought the car cheap. So I literally just said, because I am in rough shape, for some reason that resulted in me getting a cheaper car. What I mean to say is, I bought the car cheap because it is in rough shape. Likewise, wondering what time it was, the alarm clock went off. So, who's wondering what time it is? The alarm clock? I think what I mean to say is, just as I was wondering about the time, the alarm clock went off. When you're getting into more complex sentences, you're going to get into situations like this. So if you're setting up an idea that's going to pay off in the second half of the sentence, make sure that both sides of the sentence are agreeing with one another. And as a side note about composition, avoid flowery language. Do not give sentence after sentence description about anything. If we're talking about formal writing, say your point, move on. And if we're talking more creative, well, if you want to write poetry, write poetry. But when it comes to formal writing and essays, get to the point and move on. And that concludes our video for today. Those are 11 rules and one bonus rule to help you with your writing. If you can master these rules, and I know you can, your writing is going to be crystal clear. And so, if you like this video, please give me a like, a subscribe, because I got a lot more videos coming. So, thank you for your time. Have a great day.